The air at the sprawling Primate Conservation Center, nestled on the very edge of an untamed national forest, was thick and humid, humming with a tension that felt almost tangible. While the midday crowd of tourists aimed their phones and cameras, capturing the magnificent silverback gorilla, 8-year-old Alara perceived something they all missed entirely. The giant, Kale, wasn't just pounding his chest in a primal display of dominance for their entertainment. His massive, dark hands were moving with a frantic, desperate grammar, a complex language of silent urgency that she, being deaf, understood as intimately as her own heartbeat. The motions were sharp, not for show, but for communication. A secret plea was being broadcast in a world far too loud and distracted to ever notice the silent scream for what it truly was. Kale felt a surge of raw frustration, a feeling he couldn't articulate with the low rumbles and grunts expected of him. His mind, shaped by a primatologist who had gifted him the language of signs, raced with images of the tiny, helpless creature. He repeated the motions, his powerful knuckles forming the symbols he'd been taught long ago. H-E-Eep. His hands pleaded, the sign sharp and clear. Now, he jabbed a thick finger downward toward the unseen precipice at the edge of his enclosure, his gaze flicking between the chasm and the one small human he knew might understand. The other apes in his troop were agitated by his behavior, but they couldn't grasp the source of his distress. He was utterly alone in his knowledge, trapped behind the glass with a terrible secret. A profound chill snaked down Alara's spine, cold and sharp against the muggy heat of the day. The panic radiating from Kale's deep-set eyes was undeniably real, a desperate, silent plea that transcended the species barrier between them. She saw past the imposing muscle and the fearsome reputation of a silverback. She saw a mind in turmoil, a gentle giant terrified of what was about to happen. Her father, standing beside her, just saw an animal putting on a good show for the visitors. But Alara knew Kale's signs. She had shared her own silent world with him for years. This wasn't a performance. This was a genuine, life-or-death alarm, and she was the only one in the entire sanctuary who was receiving the signal. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she processed the fragmented message. Help, now, down. The meaning was both crystal clear and terrifyingly vague. Help was needed, and it was needed immediately. But what was down? Her eyes followed the direction of his insistent gesture toward the steep, foliage-choked ravine that bordered the far side of the habitat, an area strictly off-limits to all visitors and even most staff. Kale's gaze locked with hers through the reinforced glass, a silent and desperate connection that made the noisy crowd around them fade into nothing. He was begging her to see what he saw, to understand the danger he couldn't reach. But what happened next would challenge everything they knew about the line between man and beast. But to understand the silent pact that was about to be tested, we need to go back. Their unique friendship began not with a grand gesture, but in the shared quiet of a Tuesday afternoon. Since she was a toddler, Alara had found the conservation center to be a refuge from a world of overwhelming noise she could feel but never fully decipher. While other children shouted and banged on the glass, she would find a secluded spot and simply watch Kale. The giant silverback, in turn, grew accustomed to the small, still human. He felt her calm presence as a welcome respite from the constant, jarring energy of the crowds. He began to see her not as another visitor, but as a part of his familiar landscape, a quiet observer in a world that always demanded a performance from him. Their connection deepened the day Alara, feeling lonely, began signing to a butterfly fluttering near the enclosure glass. Her hands moved with the fluid grace of a native speaker, telling a story only she knew. Kale, whose early years were spent with a kind primatologist who had taught him basic signs, felt a dusty corner of his mind light up. He recognized the shapes, the flow of a forgotten language. Hesitantly, he lifted a massive hand and formed a clumsy, half-remembered sign for friend. Alara's eyes widened, a gasp she couldn't hear catching in her throat. For the first time, someone had answered her in her own language without being asked. In that moment, the thick, reinforced glass between them seemed to dissolve into nothing. From that day forward, their silent conversations became a daily ritual, an invisible bridge built sign by sign. Ilara would share the frustrations of her school day, the feeling of being an outsider, and Cale would listen with an unnerving, intelligent stillness. He, in turn, would communicate the simple truths of his own existence. Disputes with younger males, the taste of fresh bamboo, the warmth of the morning sun on his dark fur. The sanctuary staff saw only a little girl with a vivid imagination, waving at their prized gorilla. They completely missed the complex, emotional dialogue unfolding right before their eyes. Theirs was a secret world, a shared understanding that transcended species, sound, and the physical barrier that was meant to keep their worlds apart, a bond of profound and mutual recognition. This trust was cemented on a day heavy with rain, when Ilara arrived with tears silently tracing paths down her cheeks after a cruel joke from her classmates. She didn't sign. She just sat, her small form radiating a deep sadness. Cale, sensing her distress with an empathy that defied scientific explanation, abandoned his meal and came to the glass. He didn't pound his chest or make a show of it. He simply sat down, his powerful back to the rest of his troop, and mirrored her stillness, his presence a silent, comforting weight. He was her guardian, her confidant. A silent promise was forged between them, a vow of mutual protection. But what happened next would test that unspoken promise in a way neither of them could have ever foreseen. Back in the present, Ilara tugged frantically on her father's sleeve, her small hands pointing with desperate insistence from Cale to the ravine. Her father, distracted, simply patted her head. "He's just putting on a show, honey," he said with a smile, completely misreading the raw panic in her eyes and the gorilla's frantic signs. He saw a spectacle, not a plea. Ilara felt a wave of frustration. The wall of soundlessness she lived in had never felt so much like a prison, trapping Cale's urgent message with her. The sanctuary keepers, alerted to the commotion, watched Cale from a safe distance, their radios crackling with professional concern. They noted his erratic behavior. The chest beating was too rapid, the pacing too aggressive. They chalked it up to the oppressive afternoon heat, or a minor territorial dispute within his troop. They saw an animal acting out, a problem to be managed with protocols and patience. They couldn't perceive the intelligent, desperate mind behind the bared teeth, a mind screaming for help in a language they had long forgotten. Cale's frustration reached a boiling point. The small, fragile life was fading, and these powerful humans were blind. He rose to his full, magnificent height, his shadow falling over the viewing area, and let out a deep, rumbling roar that shook the very glass of his enclosure. It was not a sound of anger, but of profound, gut-wrenching despair. His dark eyes, filled with a terrible knowledge, never left Ilara. She was his only ally, his only hope in a world that refused to understand. Ignoring her father's worried calls, Ilara broke away and darted to the very edge of the public viewing platform, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The warning signs and yellow caution tape meant nothing to her now. Cale's desperate gaze followed her every move, a silent, urgent command pulling her forward. She gripped the railing, her knuckles white, and peered down into the forbidden, overgrown ravine, her whole being focused on discovering the source of her friend's terror. Her breath hitched in her throat. There, on a tiny crumbling ledge of earth barely a foot wide, a small bobcat kitten clung to a thick, exposed tree root. It was impossibly small, its spotted fur matted with dirt and fear. Below it was a sheer, fatal drop. With every soft gust of wind, loose soil trickled from the ledge, carrying small pebbles that clattered into the abyss. The kitten's tiny claws scrabbled for a better hold, its silent mews lost in the vast, uncaring space. By now, the keepers had seen where Ilara was looking, and their casual concern turned to sharp alarm. They rushed to the edge, their radios buzzing with a new urgency. "The ledge is completely unstable," one of them shouted, confirming what they all knew. "Any weight will cause a total collapse." The kitten, exhausted, let out a faint whimper, its grip visibly weakening. The powerlessness of the scene was absolute. Time was running out. Something had to be done. or all would be lost. A suffocating sense of helplessness fell over the scene, as thick and heavy as the humid air. The keepers shouted frantic, useless plans into their radios, their professional training rendered meaningless by the crumbling earth. Ilara's father grabbed her shoulder, trying to pull her back from the edge, his voice a low, worried rumble she could only feel. But Ilara was frozen, her gaze locked on the tiny, trembling life form on the precipice. She felt the kitten's terror as a cold knot in her own stomach, and saw the reflection of that same terror in Kale's desperate eyes. He was pleading with her, trusting her, his silent gaze cutting through the chaos and conveying a single, powerful message. You are the only one who can help. He wasn't just an animal in a cage, he was her friend, and his friend was in trouble. In that single, heart-stopping moment, the world around Ilara dissolved. The shouts of the keepers, the grip of her father, the gasps of the crowd, it all faded into a silent, distant hum. All that remained was the unwavering connection between her and the gentle giant behind the glass. An idea, wild and impossible, sparked in her mind. Humans couldn't reach the ledge without causing it to collapse, but Kale's powerful arms were long. He was strong. The sanctuary rules, the laws of nature, the very concept of what was possible seemed to bend and warp around the sheer force of her will. A fierce determination hardened her expression. She wasn't just a deaf girl watching an animal. She was Kale's translator, his partner, and they had a life to save. Ignoring her father's restraining hand, Ilara twisted away and planted her feet firmly before the glass wall of the enclosure. She met Kale's gaze with an intensity that silenced his frantic pacing. Her hands rose, not with the gentle flow of their usual conversations, but with the sharp, deliberate precision of a general giving orders on a battlefield. Branch, she signed, her fingers carving the shape in the air. Use big branch. She then pointed with a steady, unwavering finger from a thick, fallen oak limb inside his habitat toward the terrified kitten clinging to the ledge. Her meaning was unmistakable, a silent blueprint for a miracle. She was asking him to build a bridge, to span the gap not just between the ravine walls but between their two worlds. Kale's deep-set eyes followed her every motion, the frantic energy in his body suddenly condensing into a laser-like focus. A flicker of profound understanding crossed his features as he processed her impossible plan. He saw the logic, the risk, the only path forward. He gave a single, decisive nod, a gesture so filled with intelligence and agreement that it sent a shiver through the onlookers who saw it. Turning from the glass, his massive silver back rippling with muscle, he moved with a new and terrifying purpose. The keepers yelled warnings, assuming his agitation had finally boiled over into aggression. But Ilara stood her ground, her heart hammering with a wild, terrifying hope. What happened next defied every law of nature. Time seemed to stretch and thin, each second becoming a distinct, crystalline moment. Kale moved not with the explosive power of a silverback, but with the deliberate grace of a creature understanding the fragility of its task. His massive hands, capable of snapping bone, closed around the fallen oak limb. He felt the rough, grooved texture of the bark, testing its weight and balance with an engineer's precision. The crowd fell into a hushed silence, their phones forgotten. They were no longer watching an animal. They were witnessing a conscious, intelligent act of will. Kale's mind was a quiet space, filled only with the image of Ilara's hands and the desperate, tiny life clinging to the precipice. This was not instinct. It was a promise being kept. Slowly, with muscles coiling in controlled power, he began to extend the branch across the chasm. The air grew still, the humid afternoon heat pressing down on the silent onlookers. There was no grunt of effort, only the soft scrape of the branch's end against the enclosure's rock wall as he pivoted. It moved through the air not like a weapon, but like a carefully offered hand. The keepers watched, their professional training offering no explanation for the scene unfolding. This was an act of empathy that defied every textbook definition of animal behavior. Kale's entire being was focused on a single point, the crumbling edge of the ledge, a target he could not miss. The world had shrunk to the space between him and the kitten. From its terrifying perch, the bobcat kitten felt the ground tremble as more soil gave way. Fear was a cold fire in its tiny chest. Then, through the haze of panic, it saw the impossible. A bridge of dark wood materializing from the void, steady and solid. Its wild instincts screamed of a trap, of a predator. But when it looked past the branch, it saw not the eyes of a hunter, but the deep, calm gaze of the giant gorilla. It felt an inexplicable sense of safety, a silent reassurance that flowed across the gap. The kitten's terror warred with a primal urge to survive. It took a single, trembling step, its claws digging into the crumbling dirt for the last time. The moment its tiny paws touched the rough bark of the oak limb, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The kitten was a featherweight on the massive branch, its every hesitant step a testament to its courage. Cale held the limb with a stillness that seemed to defy physics, his knuckles white with the strain of his gentle precision. He could feel the faint, rhythmic vibration of the kitten's careful walk traveling up the length of the wood, a fragile pulse of life entrusted to him. He didn't breathe. He didn't move. He was the anchor, the steady foundation upon which this impossible rescue was built, a silent guardian holding the fate of a smaller creature in his powerful hands. Once the kitten was securely on the branch, Cale began the slow, delicate process of retraction. His movements were a mirror image of his outreach, fluid, controlled, and infinitely careful. The branch glided back over the ravine, the tiny passenger huddled on its surface, its wide eyes fixed on its rescuer. The final few feet were agonizingly slow. Cale gently lowered the tip of the branch until it rested on the solid ground inside his habitat, inches from the safety of the rock wall. He held it there, steady and unmoving, a silent offering of safe passage. He was not just saving a life. He was honoring the trust Alara had placed in him, proving their silent language was the most powerful force in the world. With a final surge of courage, the kitten leaped from the branch and darted behind a large boulder, its small body trembling with a mixture of terror and relief. The spell was broken. A wave of stunned applause and emotional gasps erupted from the crowd. Cale let the heavy oak limb drop to the ground with a soft thud. He ignored the rescued kitten and the noise of the humans. His deep, intelligent eyes rose, scanning the faces beyond the glass until they found Alara's. In that shared gaze, a profound and silent understanding passed between them, a confirmation that compassion knows no species. What happened next would echo in their hearts forever. Weeks later, a profound quiet had settled over the conservation center, replacing the frantic energy of that fateful day. The rescued bobcat kitten, given the name Echo by Alara, now resided in a temporary rehabilitation enclosure adjacent to Cale's habitat. The sanctuary staff, humbled and astonished by the events they had witnessed, had placed him there intentionally, honoring the inexplicable bond that had saved his life. Under the warm afternoon sun, Echo, now healthy and playful, would often chase leaves near the fence line, his movements full of a youthful energy that had been absent on the ledge. He was a living, breathing testament to an impossible rescue, a small, spotted symbol of courage that drew a quiet, respectful audience each day, who came not for a show, but to witness a miracle in progress. Cale's demeanor had transformed. The restless energy was gone, replaced by a calm, watchful gravitas. He would spend hours sitting near the fence, separating his world from Echo's, his massive form a silent, immovable mountain of protection. He felt a deep, paternal satisfaction watching the kitten thrive, a feeling that resonated in the quiet chambers of his heart. Echo, in turn, had lost all fear of the giant. He would often nap in the patch of sunlight closest to Cale, his small body completely relaxed, instinctively understanding that the silverback was not a threat, but his guardian. Theirs was a silent companionship, a strange and beautiful friendship, forged in a moment of shared terror and ultimate trust, an unspoken promise kept between two wildly different souls. Alara's visits were now a revered part of the sanctuary's routine. The keepers who had once seen a girl with an overactive imagination now watched her with a mixture of awe and respect. She would sit with Cale, her hands moving in the fluid, graceful dance of their secret language, telling him about Echo's progress. She'd sign how the kitten had finally started to purr, and Cale would respond with a low, soft rumble of contentment. Their connection had deepened, cemented by the life they had saved together. They were no longer just a girl and a gorilla. They were a team, a family of three, completed by the tiny, resilient creature on the other side of the fence, bound by a love that needed no sound to be understood. The story of their incredible rescue became a local legend, a powerful reminder that the lines we draw between species are often more fragile than we believe. It taught everyone who saw it that true communication is not about words, but about the willingness to listen with an open heart. The incident proved that empathy is a universal language, and courage is not defined by size or strength, but by the choice to act when another is in need. The world can be a loud, distracting place, but sometimes the most important messages are the ones spoken in complete silence. Do you also believe animals can teach us about love? Share your story in the comments and subscribe for more moments that restore faith in the world.